I thought I knew everything about my husband, David, after 5 years of marriage. We met in college, dated for 3 years, and what felt like a fairy tale wedding followed by what I believed was a perfect marriage. David was the kind of man every woman dreams of, attentive, successful in his finance career, and someone who still brought me flowers every Friday, just because. We had our dream house in suburbia, 2 cars in the driveway, and plans for children that we discussed over Sunday morning coffee, but last Tuesday morning, everything I thought I knew about my life crumbled when a courier knocked on our door at 8 a.m. sharp. David had already left for work, or so I thought, and I was still in my pajamas, sipping coffee and scrolling through my phone. The official-looking envelope was addressed to both of us, but the return address made my stomach drop. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope. Divorce papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. David Michael Rodriguez versus Patricia Elizabeth Rodriguez. The words blurred together as I tried to process what I was seeing. 5 years of marriage, and he was filing for divorce without so much as a conversation. No explanation, no warning signs that I could remember. Nothing. I called him immediately, my voice shaking. "David, what is this? What are these papers?" His response was cold, mechanical, like he was reading from a script. "Patricia, we need to talk when I get home. I think we both know this marriage isn't working anymore." But that was the thing. I didn't know. I had no idea what he was talking about. To me, our marriage was working perfectly fine. The rest of that day passed in a blur. I kept staring at those papers, looking for clues, for something that would explain this sudden upheaval. The petition cited irreconcilable differences, which told me absolutely nothing. David came home that evening with takeout Chinese food, as if this was just another Tuesday night, as if he hadn't just blown up our entire life together. "I don't understand," I said when he finally sat down across from me at our kitchen table. "What isn't working? Are you having an affair? Did I do something wrong? We were talking about starting a family just last month." David wouldn't meet my eyes. He picked at his lo mein and gave me vague answers about growing apart, about wanting different things in life, about needing space to find himself. Every response felt rehearsed, empty, completely unlike the man I'd shared a bed with for 5 years. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully beside me, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I started replaying the last few months in my head, looking for signs I might have missed. Had David been distant? Had there been red flags I'd ignored? Now that I was actively looking for them, the cracks in our perfect facade began to show. David had been taking more business trips recently, trips he'd never mentioned in detail. He'd started keeping his phone face down on the table during dinner and taking calls in the other room. There were the late nights at the office that had become more frequent, the weekend golf games that seemed to last all day, the new cologne that wasn't for any special occasion I knew about. How had I missed all of this? I prided myself on being observant, on being a good wife who paid attention to her husband's needs and moods. But somewhere along the way, I'd become complacent. I'd trusted so completely that I'd stopped really looking. The next few days were surreal. David continued to live in our house, sleeping in our bed, eating breakfast at our kitchen counter, as if we were just roommates now instead of husband and wife. He was polite but distant, treating me with the kind of careful courtesy you'd show an acquaintance. When I tried to bring up the divorce, tried to understand why this was happening, he'd shut down the conversation with phrases like, "I think it's better this way," or, "We both deserve to be happy." But I wasn't happy. I was confused, hurt, and increasingly suspicious. The David I'd married didn't make major life decisions without extensive discussion and planning. He was methodical, analytical, the kind of person who researched restaurants for weeks before choosing where to take me for our anniversary. The idea that he would file for divorce as a spontaneous decision didn't fit with anything I knew about his personality. A week after receiving the papers, I decided I needed answers. If David wouldn't give them to me directly, I'd have to find them myself. I started small, paying attention to his routines and schedules in a way I hadn't before. I noticed he was getting up earlier, leaving the house before I was fully awake. His phone was never left unattended anymore. It went with him to the bathroom, to the kitchen for late-night snacks, everywhere. I felt guilty about what I was considering, but desperation overrode my moral qualms about invading his privacy. One morning after he left for work, I went through his home office. David was usually meticulous about organization, but his desk was messier than usual, papers scattered around in a way that wasn't typical for him. Most of it was standard work documents, but buried beneath a stack of reports, I found a business card for the law firm that had filed the divorce papers. Written on the back in David's handwriting was a date from 2 weeks ago and a time, 2 p.m., 2 weeks ago. He'd been planning this for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer, while I'd been none the wiser. While I'd been planning our summer vacation and researching fertility doctors, he'd been meeting with divorce attorneys. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. I called the law firm, pretending to be David's assistant, confirming his appointment schedule. The receptionist was helpful, mentioning that Mr. Rodriguez had been in several times over the past month for consultations. A month. He'd been planning this for a month while lying to my face every single day. That evening, I confronted him again, but this time I was armed with information. David, I know you've been meeting with lawyers for weeks. I found the business card. How long have you been planning this? For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe guilt. But it was gone quickly, replaced by that same cold politeness. I wanted to make sure I understood all the legal implications before we talked, he said. I didn't want to upset you unnecessarily if I wasn't sure about moving forward. It was a reasonable-sounding explanation, but it felt like another lie. Nothing about his behavior suggested someone who was uncertain about their decision. I decided I needed professional help to protect myself. The next day, I called Jennifer Morrison, a divorce attorney who'd been recommended by my friend Sarah when she went through her divorce 2 years ago. Jennifer was direct and practical, asking questions I hadn't even thought to consider. What assets did we have? What debts? Did I have my own credit cards and bank accounts? How much did I know about David's income and investments? The meeting was a wake-up call. I realized how financially vulnerable I was. Most of our assets were in David's name because he'd handled the finances. I had access to our joint checking account, but David managed the investments, the retirement accounts, even the savings. I'd trusted him completely, never questioning where our money was going or how much we really had. Jennifer advised me to start gathering financial documents immediately. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home. While David was at work, I photographed bank statements, investment portfolios, and tax returns. I was shocked by what I discovered. David had significantly more money than I'd realized, money in accounts I didn't even know existed. There was a savings account with over $50,000 that had never been mentioned in any of our financial discussions, investment accounts that showed regular transfers I couldn't account for. More disturbing were the recent transactions. In the past 3 months, David had moved significant amounts of money around, transferring funds between accounts in ways that seemed designed to obscure the paper trail. Why would someone hide money from their spouse unless they were planning something? I also started paying closer attention to David's daily routine, looking for patterns and inconsistencies. He claimed to be working late most nights, but when I called his office after hours, he wasn't there. His assistant mentioned that Mr. Rodriguez had been leaving early several days a week for external meetings. When I asked David about these meetings, he gave vague answers about client consultations and business development opportunities. The weekend golf games were another mystery. David had never been particularly interested in golf during our marriage, but suddenly he was spending entire Saturdays and sometimes Sundays at the country club. When he came home, he didn't smell like outdoors and sweat the way you'd expect after a day on the golf course. Instead, he smelled like expensive cologne and sometimes faintly of unfamiliar perfume. I began to suspect there was another woman involved, but I needed proof. One Saturday morning, I told David I was going shopping with my sister, but instead, I followed him. He didn't go to the country club. Instead, he drove to an upscale apartment complex across town. I watched from my car as he used a key to enter one of the buildings, clearly familiar with where he was going. My heart was pounding as I waited, wondering if he was meeting someone there. After 2 hours, David emerged with a blonde woman I'd never seen before. She was younger than me, probably in her late 20s, and beautiful in the kind of effortless way that made me suddenly self-conscious about my own appearance. They kissed goodbye in the parking lot, not the kiss of new lovers, but the comfortable, familiar kiss of people who'd been together for a while. I felt sick watching my husband of 5 years embrace another woman, but I also felt vindicated. Finally, I had an explanation for his behavior, for the sudden divorce filing, for all the lies and secrecy. David was having an affair, and he wanted out of our marriage to be with this other woman. But as I drove home, still shaking from what I'd witnessed, I realized that having an affair didn't fully explain everything else I'd discovered. The hidden money, the complex financial maneuvering, the meetings with lawyers that had started a month ago. There was more to this story than just infidelity. That night, David came home with dirt on his clothes and grass stains on his shoes, maintaining the fiction that he'd spent the day playing golf. I said nothing, but inside I was seething, not just because of the affair, but because of how easily he was lying to my face. This wasn't the man I'd married, or maybe it was, and I'd never really known him at all. I called Jennifer Morrison first thing Monday morning and told her about the hidden accounts and suspicious financial activity. She wasn't surprised. "Unfortunately, this is more common than you'd think," she said. "Spouses planning to file for divorce often try to hide assets or manipulate the marital estate to their advantage. The good news is that you're documenting everything now, which will help us in court." Jennifer advised me to open my own bank account immediately and start building financial independence. She also recommended that I hire a private investigator to document David's affair, which could impact the division of assets depending on how he'd used marital funds to support his relationship with this other woman. I felt like I was living a double life, pretending everything was normal while secretly preparing for a war I hadn't wanted to fight. During the day, I gathered evidence and met with professionals who could help protect my interests. In the evening, I came home and made dinner for the man who was systematically betraying me, smiled and made small talk, and pretended I didn't know he was planning to leave me for another woman while trying to steal half of everything we'd built together. The hardest part was the loneliness. I couldn't tell my family what was happening because I wasn't ready to make it real by saying the words out loud. My friends knew something was wrong, but I deflected their concerns with excuses about work stress and seasonal depression. I felt completely isolated, carrying this enormous secret while David went about his business as if nothing had changed. But I was changing. Every day that passed, every lie I uncovered, every piece of evidence I gathered made me stronger and more determined. The naive woman who'd trusted blindly was disappearing, replaced by someone harder and more strategic. I was learning to think several steps ahead, to anticipate David's moves and counter them. I also started paying attention to David's friend Michael Thompson, who'd been appearing more frequently in casual conversation. David mentioned meeting Michael for drinks, getting advice from Michael about work decisions, and even planning a guy's trip with Michael for the summer. When I asked to meet this friend who was suddenly so important in David's life, David was evasive, claiming their schedules never aligned or that Michael was too busy with his own relationship drama. Michael had become David's closest confidant right around the time the secret meetings and hidden money transfers started. That couldn't be a coincidence. I suspected Michael knew about the affair, maybe even helped facilitate it. Men like David don't usually orchestrate complex deceptions alone. They need enablers, people who make them feel justified in their choices. 3 weeks into my investigation, I was becoming impatient for answers. I had evidence of David's lies, proof of his affair, and documentation of his financial manipulation. But I still didn't understand the complete picture. What was his end game? How long had he been planning this? And most importantly, what did he think was going to happen when the truth came out? I was about to find out. David had started taking more phone calls in his car or outside, thinking he was being discreet. But our house had thin walls, and sound carried more than he realized. I'd started positioning myself strategically when he was on these mysterious calls, hoping to overhear something useful. Friday evening, David received a call while I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. He stepped out onto the back patio, but left the sliding door slightly open. I moved closer to the window, my heart pounding as I heard fragments of conversation. I couldn't make out everything, but I heard my name mentioned, along with words like attorney, settlement, and timeline. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and when David came back inside, he was more relaxed than I'd seen him in weeks. He even complimented the meal I was preparing and asked about my day with what seemed like genuine interest. It was almost like the old David, except now I knew it was all an act. But I was getting closer to the truth. I could feel it. All the puzzle pieces I'd been gathering for weeks were starting to form a picture, and soon I'd see the complete image of what David had been planning while I lived in blissful ignorance. I just had to be patient a little longer. Soon, I'd know everything, and then it would be my turn to make some moves of my own. The breakthrough I'd been waiting for came on a rainy Thursday evening in the most unexpected way. David had been on edge all week, taking more hushed phone calls and spending extra time on his laptop with the screen angled away from me. I could sense something big was coming, but I had no idea how dramatically my world was about to shift. I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard David's voice drifting up from the living room. He was on another one of his mysterious calls, but this time he must have thought I was in the shower because his voice was louder, more relaxed than usual. I crept to the top of the stairs, my heart hammering as I strained to hear every word. "Michael, I'm telling you, this is going to work perfectly," David was saying. "She has no idea about the Riverside property or the offshore account. By the time the divorce is finalized, I'll have moved everything through the LLC we set up." Riverside property? Offshore account? LLC? My legs felt weak as I sank down onto the top step, pressing myself against the wall to hear better. "The timing couldn't be better," David continued. "The property development deal closes next month, and with Patricia's name nowhere on the paperwork, she won't be entitled to any of those profits. We're talking about a $2 million windfall, maybe more if the zoning changes go through as planned." $2 million. My husband was hiding $2 million from me while filing for divorce. I covered my mouth with my hand to keep from gasping out loud. "And the best part is, she'll never see it coming," David said, and I could hear the cruel satisfaction in his voice. "She's been so focused on thinking this is about another woman that she hasn't even asked the right questions about our finances. She's going to walk away with maybe $200,000 from the house equity and the joint accounts, thinking she got a fair deal while I keep the real assets." Michael's voice was muffled, but I could hear him laughing. Then David spoke again, and his next words made my blood run cold. "I almost feel bad about it sometimes. Patricia's been a good wife, you know, but business is business, and this opportunity is too big to let marriage get in the way. Besides, once everything's settled, I'll have enough money to start fresh with Stephanie. We've been planning this for 8 months now." 8 months. David and this Stephanie woman had been planning my financial destruction for 8 months while I cooked his dinner and planned our future together. The betrayal was so complete, so calculating that I felt physically sick. "The lawyer says as long as Patricia doesn't find out about the development deal before the divorce is finalized, there's nothing she can do," David continued. "All the paperwork shows the LLC was formed after I filed for divorce, so it'll be considered post-separation property. She'll never know what hit her." I had to grip the banister to keep from falling down the stairs. This wasn't just infidelity. This was systematic financial fraud. David wasn't just leaving me for another woman. He was stealing millions of dollars that should have been half mine while making me think I was getting a fair settlement. The conversation continued for another few minutes, with David and Michael discussing timeline details and celebrating their cleverness. When I heard David getting up to end the call, I scrambled back to the bedroom, my mind racing with everything I'd just learned. For the first time since this nightmare started, I wasn't confused anymore. I was furious. The David I'd loved and trusted for 8 years wasn't just unfaithful. He was a calculating fraud who'd been systematically planning to rob me blind while playing the role of concerned husband going through a difficult time. I pretended to be asleep when David came to bed that night, but inside I was planning my counterattack. Everything made sense now. The hidden accounts I'd discovered were just the tip of the iceberg. There was a property development deal worth millions, offshore money, and a deliberately constructed legal strategy designed to cheat me out of my rightful share of our marital assets. The next morning, I called Jennifer Morrison before David was even awake. "We need to meet immediately," I said. "I have information that changes everything about this case." In Jennifer's office 2 hours later, I played the recording I'd made on my phone during David's conversation with Michael. Jennifer's expression grew more serious with each revelation. "This is fraud," she said when the recording ended. Your husband has been hiding marital assets and deliberately structuring transactions to occur during the divorce proceedings to avoid division. The fact that he's been planning this for 8 months while still married means everything he's described belongs to the marital estate. But he said the LLC was formed after he filed for divorce, I said. Jennifer smiled grimly. That's where he made his mistake. If this property deal has been in development for months, there will be a paper trail showing his involvement began while you were still married. Emails, contracts, preliminary agreements, it's all discoverable in divorce proceedings. He can't retroactively make marital property disappear by filing some paperwork. Over the next week, Jennifer filed emergency motions to prevent David from transferring or hiding any more assets. We also hired a forensic accountant and a private investigator to uncover the full scope of David's deception. I felt like I was assembling a small army, but Jennifer assured me it was necessary given the complexity of what David was attempting. The first sign that David knew his plan was unraveling came when he received the court order freezing all transfers from any accounts or entities in his name. I was in the kitchen when he opened the legal documents, and I watched his face go white as he read through the injunction. "Patricia, what is this?" he asked, waving the papers at me. I'd been preparing for this moment all week, practicing how to respond when David realized I wasn't the naive, trusting wife he'd been manipulating. I looked up from my coffee and met his eyes with a calm I didn't feel. "It's a court order preventing you from hiding any more marital assets," I said. "You know, like the Riverside development property and the offshore accounts you've been discussing with Michael." David's mouth fell open. For several seconds, he just stared at me, and I could see him mentally scrambling to figure out how much I knew and how I'd found out. "I don't know what you think you heard, but," he started. "I heard everything, David," I interrupted. 8 months of planning to defraud me of millions of dollars while pretending to be a husband going through a difficult time. The LLC, the property deal, your girlfriend Stephanie, all of it. The mask finally slipped completely. The polite, distant man who'd been sharing my house for weeks disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating that I barely recognized. "You had no right to spy on me," he said, his voice sharp with anger. "Those were private conversations." "Private conversations about stealing my money," I replied. $2 million, David. You were planning to steal $2 million from me while making me think I was getting a fair settlement. David's jaw clenched. "That money was from my business connections, my deals. You didn't contribute anything to those opportunities. Except 5 years of supporting your career, managing our household, and being your wife while you built those business relationships," I shot back. "In case you've forgotten, that's how marriage works. We're partners, which means I'm entitled to half of everything, including your secret property deals." The argument escalated quickly from there. David tried every manipulation tactic I'd fallen for in the past, claiming I was being unreasonable, that I didn't understand business, that he was trying to protect both of us by maximizing our assets before the divorce. But I wasn't the same woman who'd been blindsided by divorce papers a month ago. I'd done my homework, and I knew exactly what he was trying to do. "Why, the courts will decide what I'm entitled to," I said finally. "And thanks to your conversation with Michael, they'll have a very clear picture of your intentions." Over the next few weeks, David's legal strategy crumbled as my team uncovered the evidence we needed. The forensic accountant traced the offshore transfers and hidden accounts. The private investigator documented David's relationship with Stephanie, including evidence that he'd used marital funds to pay for her apartment and expensive gifts. Most importantly, we found emails and contracts proving that David's involvement in the Riverside property development had begun 10 months ago, well within our marriage. David tried to fight back, hiring an expensive legal team and attempting to discredit my evidence. His lawyers argued that the recording was inadmissible, that the property deal was a separate business venture, and that I was trying to punish David for wanting a divorce. But the paper trail was too extensive, and David's own words on the recording were too damaging. The breaking point came during depositions. Under oath, David was forced to admit to the hidden accounts, the secret property deals, and the deliberate attempt to structure the divorce to minimize my settlement. His lawyer looked increasingly uncomfortable as the full scope of David's deception became clear. Mr. Rodriguez, Jennifer said during his deposition, you testified that you began planning this property development after filing for divorce. But this email from 11 months ago shows you discussing the Riverside project with your business partners. Can you explain this discrepancy? David's face flushed red as he stared at the email chain we'd subpoenaed. I may have had preliminary discussions earlier, but this formal agreement is dated 6 months ago, Jennifer interrupted, sliding another document across the table. 4 months before you filed for divorce. Were you lying when you told the court this was post-separation property? The deposition went on for hours, with David being forced to confront evidence of his deception at every turn. By the end, even his own lawyer seemed resigned to the fact that their client had been caught in an elaborate fraud. But David wasn't finished fighting. When legal tactics failed, he tried emotional manipulation. He showed up at my office one afternoon, looking haggard and desperate. Patricia, please, he said. We can work this out privately. You don't need to destroy me in court. I made some mistakes, but we can divide everything fairly without all this public humiliation. I looked at the man I'd once loved, who'd shared my bed and my dreams, who'd promised to love and cherish me through everything life might bring. The David standing in my office lobby was a stranger, someone capable of coldly planning my financial ruin while kissing me goodbye each morning. You had 8 months to work things out fairly, I said. Instead, you chose to lie to me every single day while planning to steal millions of dollars from our marriage. The courts will decide what's fair now. The trial itself was swift but brutal. Jennifer presented a mountain of evidence documenting David's fraud, while his lawyers offered weak defenses that fell apart under scrutiny. The judge was clearly disgusted by David's conduct, particularly the recording that revealed his callous attitude toward deceiving his wife. Mr. Rodriguez, the judge said during closing arguments, this court has rarely seen such a deliberate and calculated attempt to defraud a spouse during divorce proceedings. Your actions represent not just a breach of your marital obligations, but a clear attempt to circumvent the legal process designed to ensure fair division of marital assets. When the judge announced her decision, I felt a satisfaction deeper than anything I'd experienced in months. Not only was I awarded half of all marital assets, including the previously hidden property and accounts, but David was ordered to pay my legal fees and additional damages for his fraudulent conduct. The $2 million he'd tried to steal from me was now legally mine, plus interest and penalties. But more than the money, I'd won something else: my self-respect and independence. The woman who'd been blindsided by divorce papers 4 months earlier no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, smarter, and completely unwilling to be anyone's victim ever again. David's face when the judgment was read was a mixture of shock and fury. His elaborate 8-month plan had not only failed, but had cost him far more than if he'd simply been honest about wanting a divorce from the beginning. His relationship with Stephanie didn't survive the financial devastation and public humiliation, and his reputation in our community was permanently damaged. 6 months later, I was living in a beautiful new house that I'd bought with my settlement money, pursuing a master's degree I'd always dreamed of, and building a life that was entirely my own. The betrayal still hurt sometimes, but it had also taught me valuable lessons about trust, self-reliance, and the importance of paying attention to what people do, rather than what they say. I never spoke to David again after the trial, but I heard through mutual friends that he'd moved to another state, presumably to start over somewhere his reputation hadn't preceded him. Michael, his co-conspirator, had apparently distanced himself once the legal consequences became clear. The most surprising outcome was how much I enjoyed my independence. The life I was building wasn't the one I'd planned 5 years ago, but it was authentically mine in a way my marriage had never been. I made my own decisions, managed my own money, and never again had to wonder if someone I trusted was secretly working against my interests. Sometimes people asked if I regretted the way things ended, if I wished David had just been honest about wanting a divorce instead of trying to defraud me. The answer was always no. His deception had revealed his true character, and better to learn that lesson during divorce proceedings than years later when the stakes might have been even higher. The woman who'd once trusted blindly had learned to verify everything, and that knowledge was worth more than any settlement. I'd discovered I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, smarter than I'd given myself credit for, and completely capable of fighting for myself when necessary. That was a lesson no one could ever take away from me.